Boom. Just say this is Sebastian Junger, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Oh, I thought you. I'm sorry. All right, sorry. I thought you were talking to Josh. I thought you were talking.
No, talking to you.
Sorry. This is Sebastian Junger, and you're watching the Break It Down show live.
Yeah, it's so great to have you on, have you back, man. It's great. I love what you do. This most recent book, as always. Look, hey, you wrote a good book. What a surprise, right? You're great at this stuff. But you take the experiences, you layer in the science. You hooked me way back when you wrote Perfect Storm, and just how you explained the energy of wind. And what was going to happen when we had this was I was going to tell you my buddy Brian is currently rowing across the Atlantic Ocean, Boston to London, except for the ocean said no. Actually, his boat said no, and they had to turn around. And currently his boat is bobbing around the ocean, and they had to get rescued by the Coast Guard. And that's how much of a mean mistress the Atlantic Ocean can be. It's crazy when you do these hard things come after you to make you stop.
Yeah, absolutely. Our society has figured out how to make us feel like we're in control of outcomes, because most of the time on most days we obviously are, and when you can push down with a little bit on your right hand foot and go 80 miles an hour and be 500 miles, away, and by dinner time, you feel in control of stuff. But the truth is, we're not.
Yeah, yeah. All three of us have seen combat time, and we have stories of the time where we almost saw something happen, or something happened to someone over here, and you realize that there's just a whole lot of providence in all of this. And you talk about in the book about how if you had made this decision, which is not a life and death decision, when you're making it, it turns out that these things do happen. But like I stood up in a not a turret, but like in a portal in a Stryker vehicle one time, and a bullet whizzed by my ear, and I thought, I'm a civilian here. I don't need to be up here. I don't have a job. I'm sitting back down. But if that Iraqi had not dropped the bullet, or whatever he had done, not taking a sip of his coffee before he shot at me, man, he might have cleaned my clock forever, And so these moments are imperceptible and not life or death when you make them. But man, it sure adds up to something cataclysmic.
Yeah, the same thing happened to me. A bullet missed me by a few inches, shot from 500 meters. So, whatever that angle is, it's terrifyingly small. And, it really made me wonder about the sort of mechanism that's running this whole deal. And to me, the conclusion I came to was clearly everything's random. And good people get killed and bad people don't get killed, or vice versa. And there isn't a grand design. And there isn't. I was told once at a reading that I did recently about my book, where, to cut to the chase, I almost died, and I was saved by a sort of miracle of medicine. And someone said, "Well, you're really saved by the grace of God. That's actually what saved you." And I'm like, you know what? I wasn't. I was saved by 2 doctors, 10 units of blood that people donated. And if we're going to go with the grace of God, here's my problem with you, sir, is that why me? Why me and not Tim? Why me and not a 5-year-old with cancer, right? And what you're saying is God is running a random lottery for his grace. And I just came up lucky. And if that's how it works, I don't want any part of that God, right? Sorry, I'll do this on my own. So that was I'm a lifelong atheist, and that was my response to him. I don't believe that there's a guiding hand in any of this. I think you easily could have been killed or not killed, and the universe doesn't really care either way.
Yeah. Josh, I want to bring you in to talk a little bit about this, because you're the one well, first, for everybody, Josh Mantz is here. He's above me. I'm going to bring him into the main screen. Josh has written on his own experience with death. He was shot and killed in Iraq, and obviously there he is. He's not dead anymore. And he's had to deal with his own demise and what it means. And he's going to get a PhD in this stuff, and what the tearing the veil, but coming back, and what that looks like. So Josh, thanks for coming on. Thanks for talking about this topic with me. I know this isn't your favorite thing to do on live. And so I guess when we start talking about this and talking about God and perceptions and randomness, what are your thoughts?
There's so much to it. And Sebastian, great job on your book. It's really great.
Thank you.
There's Pete kind of asked me to jump onto this, just maybe to highlight some of the questions that you pulled out during your work, which I think are just truly core philosophical questions in some ways. First, I share that with you, what you actually just said. I flatlined for 15 minutes from a sniper shot from my femoral artery. And, this medical team in Baghdad just stopped at nothing to pull me back and really just pulled off this, what seemed like an impossible task. And the thing that people would typically say to me afterwards is man, God was responsible for that. And never did anyone point to that medical team, so that was always my response to them. I was like, maybe, but there's a lot more to this, right? Like some maybe divine element working through the instruments that are down here. So anyway, what I'll just say to maybe add to that, I guess, these types of experiences can really bring up a lot of existential questions that hit us head on. And after more than 15 years now of working through this, I'll just say that I've gone through many, many, many evolutions of thinking through this and moving through it in a lot of different ways. And looking back now, I would say that it was more of a spiritual trauma than anything else. Not in the sense that it was a bad experience. It was the most magnificent experience of my life. But there was no theology that I found, nobody that I was surrounded by, at least in our culture, who was able to actually help me kind of process that and think about it in different terms. I had to find that on my own. And I think those are the types of questions that are really worth pursuing.
I read that, and I didn't put it in my book, but I read that people who have NDEs, near-death experiences, who survive a close encounter with death and are sort of brought back medically, that the divorce rate among those people is astronomical. And the theory is that they have an experience that other people are uncomfortable with, don't understand, don't want to hear about, are avoidant of, dismiss, right? And then the person with the NDE, not only are they not being sort of heard and acknowledged and honored in some way, but they also feel a little bit special because they're different from everybody. And if you're different, if you're different from your spouse in a fundamental way, it doesn't feel good in a marriage, right? The point of marriage is that you're the same, right? And if you feel like, wow, I've been sort of like anointed in some way, in this bizarre way, right? And then she doesn't even want to hear about it, or he doesn't even want to hear about it. That spells the doom of many relationships statistically. It's sort of interesting.
Yeah, definitely, Sebastian. I mean, that's a really great point. My sense is that you kind of see that just in trauma in general too, right? When people have these really big experiences, whether they're perceived as positive or negative or anything in between, it can be very isolating, right? Because we don't have the language to describe it yet. That's an act of creativity to find the words. And then in terms of isolation itself, spiritual isolation was probably that's the thing that emerged over time. And it's the thing that led me to study consciousness in grad school. I don't feel that isolation anymore, but I'll tell you, it really took a lot of effort, right?
Yeah.
A lot of effort.
Yeah. I'm not surprised. What happened to me, I mean, after, we can talk about the details medically, but the upshot was that I did survive, and I got home and I did this crazy thing, which apparently is quite common. Who knew? But I was seized with this fear that I actually had not survived, that I'd actually died. And that what I was experiencing, which I thought was my life resuming. I came back from the hospital. There's my little girls. I had at the time a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old. I was married, and et cetera, a beautiful life. That it was all now a dying hallucination, and that I was actually a ghost. I wasn't really there. And I know it sounds silly, like a thought experiment or something, but the fear was profound and it was very real. And it made me unbelievably anxious and eventually extremely depressed. And I could start to, I'm in a wonderful, amazing, totally rock solid marriage to an amazing woman. But it made me realize, like, if my wife and I, Barbara, if we were not as solid as we were, and I was having these, I was watching my problems affect the marriage. I mean, I was watching the marriage take a hit because I was really edging into a kind of madness. And a kind of madness where I thought I had seen the truth and everyone else was crazy to not see it, right? And no, it's not like we came close to anything, but I eventually went to a counselor, a shrink, because my wife is like, honey, you're getting a little hard to live with. Like, you got to deal with this. Like, it's frightening to me.
Yeah, the thing is, I share that with you also over the years. I mean, there are points where I had, we have to hit those questions head on, like especially when there's legitimate theories out there on multi-universe, which I think you spoke to some of this in your book, and it's so yeah, I've had definitely went through rounds of that myself. Thinking, is there a possibility that the death in one state was a waking up in another, and this is just a continuation of that process?
Yeah.
Maybe. I guess just maybe something to point out is just, you also mentioned this kind of state of depression and anxiety, and one thing we know that thinking about existential issues tends to create depression and anxiety, right? Nihilism. It's really difficult to study philosophy well, right? Because you end up kind of disproving yourself on anything that you grip hold of. And I think sometimes as a result of that, our society has gotten away from even asking a lot of those questions, or people shy away from it, right?
Yeah.
And I think these are the things that need to be brought back right now, especially in our current day.
I agree.
I thought I would ask you guys, for Sebastian, for you had that opening that cracked when you were on the table having your near-death experience, and Josh, you obviously 15 minutes, you were gone. Heck, I'd take the N out of yours and just call it a death experience. But did all of you come back out of that hole, out of that time away, or is some of you gone? And does some of you go to an alternate place where there is a Sebastian that exists in a different realm that is having that dream that you feared? Is that possible? Is that too far away philosophically? Or I don't know. What are your thoughts? I mean, when you have that calling, is it collecting some of you?
Yeah. So one of the sources of my fear was that 2 days prior, I can't remember, I've done a few interviews today. Did I make it clear to everyone I'm an atheist and a rationalist, and my dad was a physicist? Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because now I couldn't remember. So 2 days prior to this happening, I had no prior knowledge. It's not like I had, heart issues or a stroke or something. I mean, I was in perfect health. What happened to me was a ruptured aneurysm, a random rupture of my artery, in my pancreatic artery in my abdomen, right? And it's a freak random rare thing. And I had no reason to think that anything was coming, right? But 2 nights prior, I had the most ghastly dream I've ever had and I've ever heard of, actually. And in my dream, I was floating above my family, my wife and my 2 little girls, and they were crying. And I was waving to them, waving my arms and shouting to them, and they couldn't hear me. They couldn't see me. And I was made to understand that I had died. I was now dead. There was no going back. And that's just how it was. And I was so anguished because I thought it was really happening. Like, oh my God, I'm dead. Like, that's it? Are you kidding? Wait. No, sorry, it's over. And I was so anguished that I woke up. And then 36 hours later, I was actively dying. In mid-sentence, I felt a pain in my abdomen. not a sniper's bullet, but the body's equivalent of a sniper's bullet. And I was bleeding out just like you were. I was bleeding out into my own abdomen and in and out of consciousness while my wife called the ambulance. And so when I finally got home, I suddenly had this idea, I started researching NDEs, and one of the most common is that the person is hovering above their family, above the doctors, above their body, unable to communicate with them, removed. And in the case of people who survive, they are returned to their body and they sort of wake up. But my dream was a classic NDE, and I knew nothing about this stuff, right? And so my fear was that it wasn't a dream. That was me actually dying in my sleep. And that everything that followed was a dying hallucination, including going to the hospital, including coming back from the hospital, including this moment right now where I'm holding my daughter on my lap and I'm watching the branches wave in the wind. And that maybe there was another universe in the sort of multiverse idea. There was another reality where I actually died and my family's mourning me, and I'm in this reality, and I think I survived. And it may be sort of, well, A, it may be completely crazy, but B, it made me desperate to figure out how to go to that other reality to tell my family it's okay. Like, there's somewhere else where we're still all together, right? Like, and I know I sound like a crazy man saying this stuff, right? But I can't tell you, A, it's irrefutable. It can't be refuted, right? And B, it felt real. It felt threatening. It felt terrifying. And there was those feelings that took 2 years to climb out of it. I got to say, I've had some combat trauma. I've been in combat, and it has an effect on you and whatever. Nothing compared to the trauma of this for me. Nothing. This eclipsed anything I'd had on the battlefield.
You're not crazy, Sebastian. I'm right there with you every step of the way. Historically, we didn't always look down on dreams, and for reasons I won't even go into, I think dreams have the capacity to be the most powerful source of self-development and growth if we know how to listen to them, pay attention to them, and a lot of the reductionistic trends are the very things that push us away from dreams. And yeah, most of them are just day residue dreams. Most dreams that most people have are meaningless, but sometimes there's bigger dreams that we kind of stumble upon like luck, like maybe you did. And I wonder, like, what would it look like if we lived in a world where we say, hey, I just had this dream where I was dead. Is it possible that I can use that in some way to inform the actions that I maybe take in life? Like, not as a decisive fact per se, but something that can maybe nudge me to do something.
Right. And, I asked a palliative care doctor out of Harvard about this, and he's a, straight up MD, rational, medical, Western medicine, etc. I asked him about this, and he said, well, it's on some level. I had an aneurysm that had been growing for decades that was on the verge of rupturing, right? And probably already starting to leak a little bit of blood before it fully tore open. And an aneurysm is an unnatural ballooning in an artery, right? From a weak spot or something like that. It's an aberration. And he said, on some level, your body knew that there was a threat. And it was trying to communicate with your unconscious mind, hey, warning, Will Robinson, the danger, right? Something's going to happen. And as you say, in a more tuned in culture, that might have been taken seriously. At the very least, I wish I had a doctor who, if I said, Doc, I had this incredibly realistic dream that I died. I want to get checked out, right? Like, and he would have said, absolutely, that's a diagnostic tool, and check it. I'm going to order an MRI for you, and they would have seen it on an MRI. All they needed to do was scan me. I've been so healthy my whole life that I've never had an abdominal scan, right? So that was the problem. But in a more tribal society, one of the core tenets of shamanism is the sort of dream world, which is the entry to the world of the dead, to the ultimate reality, and as opposed to this puny little living world that we're sort of stuck in for 70 years. And so in a small scale tribal society, shamanism exists all over the world, right? In every environment, in virtually every culture. There, the sort of pre-agriculture, the sort of Neolithic and Paleolithic level of society, almost all of them had some form of shamanism. And the idea is that there are people that have these dreams, and these dreams allow them entry into the world of the dead, and they come back with information, right? Information and processes that the people need. And so when I woke up in the ICU after they saved my life in the morning, the nurse, the ICU nurse, said, "Congratulations, you made it. Like, you almost died last night. No one can believe you're alive." And I was completely shocked. I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea I almost died, right? And I mean, I got to the hospital, my blood pressure was 60/40, which isn't zeros over zero, which you were, of course, but it was still pretty low, right? I needed 10 units of blood. And I saw my dead father above me as I was dying. Like, what a thing to do to an atheist, right? So then I wake up in the ICU. It's completely shocking to me that I almost died. And when she came back an hour later, "So how you doing?" I said, "Well, not so well. What you told me is terrifying. Like, I had no idea." And she said, "Try this. Instead of thinking about it like something scary, try thinking about it like something sacred." Now, I don't know what she herself meant by that, but in my mind, I thought, okay, shamanism. Like, I've had a classic shamanic journey to the afterworld, right? And what shamans do is they come back with information. Like, I'm a journalist. It's not a shaman, but I'm a journalist, right? I know how to communicate with people, write things down that are maybe of value, of service, of use. What did I learn? What sacred knowledge did I come back with that will help other people in the task of their lives? And that was what I did with, to your point about allowing dreams to mean things. That was what I did with this ultimate dream that I had, which was almost dying.
Sebastian, can I quote from your book real briefly? Just a quote that I think ties into what you just said there.
I'd be honored. Thank you.
One that just really jumped out at me is it's an open question on page 74. It's an open question whether a full and unaverted look at death crushes the human psyche or liberates it. Right. And tying into this theme of knowledge that we maybe received from these types of experiences, there's a more ancient word for this called gnosis, spelled with a G. And it's an ancient Greek word that means knowledge, but not an ordinary form of knowledge, but a divine knowledge, right? A knowledge that's imparted on us, but that is also ineffable. It can't be put into words, right? And if you go really deep into this concept, it's more of a force, right? Gnosis is like this combination of will and knowledge that sort of acts as a lure inside of us that propels us to action. So it's such a great question that when on one hand we have these tremendous big experiences that shatter our perception of reality, right, and cause us to question everything that we thought we knew. And then when we come back, and I mean, I really think that the challenge for me wasn't dying; it was coming back to this world, right? This state of what felt like this incredible perfection, stacked up with a world that's very divided and in conflict, right? But the point is, can we take that knowledge and now integrate it and lead our lives accordingly? And it's that integration. It's that integration that requires so much strength and practice and effort, right? It's not an easy process. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that at all.
Yeah, well, the truth can be unbearable, right? I mean, the epistemological truth about the universe, it's like children watching an adult film, like they're not ready for it. I'm not sure we humans are ready for the ultimate truth about our own existence, our own consciousness. And it seemed to depend on the person. So Melville, in his great work Moby Dick, writes about a character named Pip, who's based on a real person. And Pip basically fell out of a chase boat, and the chase boat was carried away by the whale, and Pip was left floating in the middle of the Pacific, no ships in sight, completely alone in a bathtub warm sea, completely calm, with 3 miles of ocean underneath him and absolutely nothing. And he treaded water for hours. And by random chance, by absolute random chance, the mothership happened to chart a course right past him, and they hauled him back on board. And Melville says that this character, Pip, based on a real person, went mad. And he had seen God's foot upon the treadle of the loom, as Melville wrote. And it made him insane. And he said, and so God's truth is man's madness. Mm-hmm. That was how Melville put it. And then there's another amazing anecdote. Dostoevsky suffered a mock execution when he was in his mid-20s. Dostoevsky, the great Russian writer, he and his buddies were fond of sitting around talking about liberating the serfs and other things like other outrageous ideas like that. And the Tsar's police rounded them up, threw them in jail for 8 months, then discharged them. They were put in a wagon. They thought they were going to be taken home. Instead, they were driven to a city square, tied to posts, and a firing squad was lined up in front of them. And these young men only had 2 or 3 minutes to go from, oh, I'm going home to my family, to my life is about to end, right? Mm-hmm. And it was a performance at the last moment as the men braced for the command to fire and their chest would be torn open by musket balls. As they braced themselves, a rider cantered into the square and said, the Tsar forgives them. 2 of the 6 men were insane for the rest of their lives. They could not bear the knowledge. They could not bear what they'd seen, what the world looked like in those moments of clarity, right? Dostoevsky, this is what he saw. This is the alternative to insanity is divine vision, right? This is what he saw. He said he noticed sunlight glinting off the roof of a church, a distant church. And he thought to himself, in moments, I will become part of the sunlight. I'll become part of all things. And so there you have the 2 possibilities for what happens to the human brain when we're confronted with the truth that we really all are not neurologically wired to bear, right? I mean, I don't think we have the wiring to really accommodate that kind of truth given to us that suddenly.
Right. Yeah. So maybe it's more of a process, right? And then you can bring in a different kind of question. You know, what happens if you have multiple near-death experiences or multiple big events in your life? What happens after each one of those? Yeah. And it kind of follows this similar pattern in a lot of different realms, right? That there's a status quo, so to speak. There's a baseline, a ground of who we are and think we are now, and then there's some disruption to that self. Right. We gain some knowledge, and then we have to go through the hard work of integrating it and transformation, right? And that's a perpetual process, not a one-shot deal. The one thing I'll add too that speaks to this is so there's shamanism, yes. I'll add to that all of the esoteric spiritual traditions, which are much lesser known and very stigmatized and misunderstood. But when we talk about the traditions of mysticism, all the major traditions, Christianity, Islam has Sufism, Christian mysticism, Jewish mysticism, Hinduism has mystical counterparts, if not a mystical tradition. But that is all about cultivating these types of experiences using things like breath work. And that process is viewed as a very difficult, very challenging process of perpetual spiritual growth, right? To kind of continuously develop, purify, purge ourselves of imperfections to prepare to receive this knowledge when it comes our way.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lifetime of work, right?
a lifetime of work, maybe more lifetimes, right?
At least a lifetime, yes.
Yeah.
Let me jump in here real quick and do my job for a second. Hey, everybody, we've got Sebastian Junger on the show, and here is the link for his book. Oh, I pushed the button too many times. There it is right there. You know what I always say? Buddy read. Buy one for you and your friend. Hey, if you got a reading group, this is a fantastic book. It's quick read, but it's powerful, and you're just not going to believe the journey that Sebastian takes you on. You're hearing these guys talk about this thing for real. Like, just get it. I don't care if you buy it on my link or anywhere else. Just get this book. It's I don't know. Is there other? Can you rate something 500 stars? That's what I'm going to rate it as. 500 stars. It's wonderful. So I wanted to get back to this thing you guys were talking about a little bit. And one of the quotes that Josh has told me on a past episode when I had him on, Sebastian, was that dying is a peak experience. We've kind of been playing around this topic, but it doesn't seem peak to you from my point of view. What I hear you talking about, because you have this wonderful wife, wonderful life, these two young girls. When he says dying is a peak experience, can you wrap your head around that?
You know, it might be easier when you're quite young or quite old. And, you know, when you're quite young, I mean, the love and the obligations of parenthood, for me, were completely transformative. I think I'm not sure I would have handled them well when I was young, but once I became a father, it was the basis of everything, including why I want to stay alive, right? Like, I've watched enough movies. I've gone to enough bars. I've gone hiking enough. I'm good, right? Except I've got these two little creatures that I'm responsible. My wife and I are responsible. I love more than I love the whole rest of the world combined, right? And as my youngest daughter said when I asked her, like, I said, you know what love means? I asked her 3 times, and she finally said, yeah, love means stay here. That's what love means. I'm like, so dying with that in the context, for me, is not a peak experience. It's not even my loss, it's their loss, right? In fact, it's tearing a hole in the middle of their hearts, right? Like, I'm not doing that willingly, right? Like, and so, and then when you're quite old, I saw with my mother, my father, it's not hard. Life, your body, everything hurts. You know, I mean, it's like, okay, I'm done. I want to rest now. You know, like, it's like that, and that may be a peak experience. But for me, I had a lot to live for, and I didn't quite die, right? Like, I mean, I was on the way. I was maybe 10 minutes from dying, but my heart never stopped. Now, it may be that when your heart stops, there's a process, either it's neurochemical or metaphysical. Like, I don't know. I mean, who knows, right? But either way, that may trigger a process which is, in fact, ecstatic and transformative and vast and eternal. Absolutely, right? I didn't get that far. That my heart never stopped. It was headed that way. They managed to put 10 units of blood in me and stabilize me. And eventually, 5 hours later, they managed to plug the leak in my abdomen and get me out of danger. But so I didn't actually technically die for whatever that's worth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, every experience is unique, right? And one of the common things of approaching this point of death is visions of family members and these realizations of the things that are most important to us. And I absolutely felt that. To have the feeling of being the dying one and know that you're leaving away, trying to reach back, but you're getting pulled away, is a feeling that was, I mean, I don't want to shake that feeling, right? And that was very vivid and real. And my very last thoughts prior to the transition into flatlining was of my family. In fact, my very last conscious words were, please take care of them. Right.
And these are your children or your family of origin?
This is my mother and my sisters.
Okay.
I had a very young sister at the time who was only, I think, 5 years old. She was born late. But when I speak of a peak state, and maybe that's not the best word to use, right? Non-ordinary state of consciousness, peak state. What I'm talking about is precisely that transition that occurred afterwards, that was so overwhelmingly powerful that even thoughts of family, even thoughts of any human love were unreachable, because it was such an overwhelming, I'll call it a divine force. The best words I've found to describe it are found in yogic literature, where they talk about being a raindrop that dissolves into the ocean.
Right.
And it kind of so there's this so many different questions that this very thing can open up, and so many paths we could go down, right? But it's this another common experience, this idea of interconnectedness and all being one with the creation. There's an element where I really question strongly now if death exists at all, or if it itself is just an illusion, right?
Right.
So when I say peak state, Pete, this is after like the last 8 years of grad school and thinking about this, like probably at a level that's like too it might be irresponsible to throw it out too briefly, right? In a context like this,
Right. If I'd love to ask you, if you don't mind talking about it, and if you do, I totally understand, but about what your understanding was of your situation after you were struck by the bullet. And I ask because my colleague and brother and friend, Tim Hetherington, that I made the film Restrepo with, I spent a year off and on in combat with him, with American troops in Eastern Afghanistan. He was killed in Libya on an assignment that we were both supposed to go on. And at the last minute, I couldn't go. And in the city of Misrata, he was hit by a fragment from a mortar round, and it severed his femoral. And he bled out from the same kind of wound that you had. And he died in the back of a pickup truck racing for the Misrata hospital, along with some other wounded people. And, of course, I always wondered, like, if he knew he was dying, what was his experience? What was it okay for him? Like, as his brother, as his friend, I felt incredibly guilty that it was him, not me. I mean, I felt like unbearably responsible, irrationally, for his death, right? But also, I just wanted to know what the experience was actually like. So could you address that for me? Or, I mean, I don't know if you mind going back into that territory, but I'd love to know.
Yeah, I'd love to chat about this. And so, yeah, there was, I was very conscious that I was dying, and I would describe it as, a reduction of consciousness occurred, right? In that, at first I was aware of the other members of my team and what was kind of going on in my external environment. And as I approached closer and closer to this transition into death, that reduction went more inward, right? Where I was only capable of thinking about my family in a slightly different circle. And then it was just like me, right? It was like this one-on-one experience with this extremely overwhelmingly powerful divine energy. And it wasn't just that it was welcomed or that it was okay, Sebastian. It was nothing short of ecstasy and joy. In a way that I have never felt before and have never been able to fully replicate since.
Yeah.
But that was only in that last little bit. Everything, here's maybe a way to think about it. The process of dying is usually uncomfortable and grief is very real.
Right.
But death itself is that was an experience of the most profound ecstasy that I've ever felt.
And do you think that ecstasy happened while you were flatlined, or were you still conscious or still alive?
During the transition between both. So one thing you write about in your book is that these younger folks, when they flatline, they tend to just flatline, right? They hold on for I was laughing when I read that because that's exactly what the medical team told me when I went back to Baghdad a couple months later. He's like, we thought you were going to be good. We thought we had you stabilized. And then suddenly when you died, you just, boom, you were gone. So it was, I think during that precise transition, right? I've never tried to, nor would I ever try to describe this in a way that it wasn't, or try to make connections that aren't there. I've described it how it's been, right? How it was, as accurately as I can. And I didn't have a lot of the types of experiences that some of the research points to. You know, I didn't have the out of body experience. I wasn't floating above. Right. You know, but there were definitely there was definitely like this incredibly powerful transition, which the closest I can come to replicating it, which can get pretty close, is with certain forms of breathwork experiences, and certain psychedelics potentially too, but they come with different challenges sometimes. So.
Right. Well, thank you, because poor Tim, like I've worried about him ever since, and what those last minutes were like. Was he terrified? Was he kicking himself for going to, like this war zone? What was happening with him? And so that's very comforting to hear you about what that was like.
Sebastian, were you aware that you had a joke that would make Josh laugh in that book that you wrote?
No. No, I wasn't.
But this is the thing, right? So I want to pull this back out, and we'll just layer it with combat. When we re-enter life after these things, I have, almost been killed, but never actually been anywhere near death a bunch of times. And so when I think about our peers that go back to like a workaday life, whatever it is they're doing, and some boss comes trundling up, or some politician comes walking up and says, hey, here's the danger ahead. I've been in a head-on collision with an Abrams tank, right? There's a certain level of like, this is danger, and where you're talking about, you're not even off the floor, right? And so when you come back from these things, and death, I want you guys to add this in, like, how do you handle? I had to recalibrate what life is at my own therapy. One of the big lessons I've had to learn and then practice and then get good at was my therapist reminded me, like, you live in Orange County, everything's just fine here. You don't have to worry that impending doom. You have to and so all of that stuff I had to deal with. And I certainly am not going to be afraid of things that just aren't on the scale for things that we've experienced.
Well, one of the things that was disorienting for me was that when I stopped war reporting, I stopped after Tim was killed, right? And when I stopped war reporting, I thought that I was done being at risk. Right. And what I didn't realize is that, you could have all these crazy experiences and basically go to the poker table with your chips as a journalist or a soldier, whatever. It's like, all right, man, I'm gonna go a few rounds, see if I can make some money at this table without, getting my clock cleaned here. Right. Like, and so I did that for a while. I got more chips than I spent. Right. I mean, I came out ahead. I'm like, all right, Tim got killed. I'm out of this game right now. And it was shocking that I got home. I made that decision. I got home. I met the right woman, and I had a family, and I was living a quiet, virtuous life in the woods of Massachusetts in an old house, right? In this beautiful spot, right? And then it's like I owed the mafia money, right? It's like, listen, we will find you, right? There's nowhere you can hide. Like, when we want our money back, we're going to come get it. And I felt like that was what the universe was doing. It's like, listen, you borrowed a bunch of carbon from us.
Mm-hmm.
You want the carbon back. Thank you very much. Right? Like 58 years, that's quite enough. And that to me was terrifying, because it meant that every single day, I never knew, none of us know, every single day, I never knew if it would be the last day that I'm alive. And that's true for all of us every single day. And that can be absolutely paralyzing. But then I realized the flip side of that existential terror is reverence, right? You're not going to properly revere and honor life if you don't understand that it can be taken away in the next hour, right? Or less, right? Like you have no idea. And when you understand that, yeah, it's terrifying, except it opens up the gateway to the sort of like, oh my God, here I am, right? What am I going to do with my Tuesday? I mean, I get a Tuesday. Are you kidding? Like, I have a family. There's a tree. Are you crazy? Like, I get all this. Like,
Yeah.
and that's I don't have God. I don't have religion, but I have that. And I think God and religion and that are in some ways the same thing, different ways of talking about the same thing.
Yeah, they totally can be the same thing, depending on how you're willing to look at it, right? And having experiences that can cultivate that type of awareness, right? And appreciation and reverence for what this is like it in a way. I think it really makes the experience worth it itself, right? If
Yeah.
I'll just call this maybe a more recent evolution of my own, right, personally, and it revolves around sacrifice and responsibility, and to the extent that each person can participate in that, and to the extent we're willing to, right, it is just over the years what started to come through, even after the appreciation, right, was in whatever way I can to try to become a steward of that, and almost an instrument of this divine will in life, and one of the biggest misperceptions about the mystical traditions and yoga in terms of like folks who seek out and seek enlightenment, right, or attain enlightenment. It's not just about attaining enlightenment. It's about attaining that state and then coming back and putting it into action into this world, right? So when they speak of sacrifice, it's a sacrifice of the ego self, right? The self where I want this, I want that, in an effort to serve the creation in a broader capacity, right? So that's just something that has come through, and there's actually the esoteric spiritual traditions all speak to this. It's not very well known today.
Well, I think that, I mean, I was a journalist, not a soldier in combat, but I think my understanding is that one of the compelling things about combat for young men, young soldiers, is that they experience this, not all of them, but one of the things many of them say is they experience this loss of ego in the sense that they're in great danger and they're worried about everybody else. And they sort of lose themselves in the sort of like group endeavor that is survival in combat. And that loss of self, strangely for a species that is highly motivated by individual pursuit and individual gain and advantage. Strangely, the experience of loss of ego, whether it's through drugs or sort of ecstatic dancing or near-death experience or combat or whatever it may be, the loss of ego, rather than being an assault and a transgression on our individual dignity, it actually is an ecstatic experience, right? It actually is the thing like, oh, finally, I'm here, right? Like, I don't exist. I'm all thing. I'm the, like I'm whatever. Like, I've left the bounds of my body, and now I'm who I really want to be. I interviewed a guy who was a former wildland firefighter who had gone he's in my book, and he had gone hunting with his son. They lived in Montana, and he experienced an arterial rupture in his abdomen, just like I did. It obviously was bleeding slow, or he wouldn't have survived. And they spent 24 hours in the wilderness before his son could get him out, huddled around a fire and sub-freezing temperatures and all of that while he's experiencing blood loss, right? And the next morning, the son went for help, and this guy is lying on the ground, actively dying. And he suddenly realized, he said the mountain started to move, and he could see all the animals, and he could see the dead animals and the ancestors of the animals, and that he realized he was an animal too. And he realized he was part of everything that he was seeing. He was part of it.
Mm.
And he had this complete annihilation of his ego, of himself. He was no longer an entity. He was part, like Dostoevsky said, I will become part of all things, right? And for some reason, and I think that points to maybe something about the universe that we don't understand. For some reason, that's an ecstatic experience rather than a horrifying one. And it may point to what Schrödinger, one of the grandfathers of quantum physics, said, which was he believed that there was a universal consciousness that suffused the entire colossus of the universe, and that we all are tiny, tiny individual parts of that universal consciousness. And of course, we go back to that when we die.
You talk about this in the book too. You go into the real deep science part, the quantum part. I had a guy named, he's not with us anymore, but a guy named Dr. Andrew Friedman, who worked at UCSD as an engineer, he's a cosmologist, and he and his partner did a test similar to what you described called the cosmic bell test. And they shot light at two different distant galaxies, and they couldn't make, the laws as we understand them work properly. These things that shouldn't know each other were connected. These things are not just light years apart, like vast, vast distances apart, and they couldn't unentangle them. And so it challenges, these laws of nature that Einstein had come up with, and it tears away at free will. It tears away at all of these things that are supposed to belong to us. And so then that brings us back into like this connectiveness, and when we die and that experience, and what is, like if our subconscious can send a dream, or if our conscious can send a dream to our subconscious, whichever way that communicative path works, both ways maybe. If Josh can tell us that by visiting the veil and tearing through it, you gain new enlightenment, it sounds like there's a whole lot more that we can learn about this stuff. But science, look, they want journals, they want to be able to replicate, they want to be, and so this becomes a hard thing to understand. Is this something that we should even try to understand? Do we need to puncture through these things and gain a greater understanding of what it is to die?
Well, I've thought about that. I mean, the physicists who pioneered quantum theory, many of them were quite unnerved by the contradictions that they were encountering with things like the double slit experiment and delayed choice quantum erasure and things like that. It just made no sense, right? And there was sort of a sense of like, be careful because we're interrogating God, and God may not like it. Like, I mean, God metaphorically, but like we're penetrating the deepest secrets of the universe. What happens if we find out? Like, we don't know. Like, we don't, the universe might depend on not being completely understood for its own existence, right? And if the entire universe is one enormous consciousness, and if that consciousness understands that all there is that consciousness, maybe the whole thing goes bye-bye, right? Like, whatever. This is all just sort of fantastical theorizing, but we don't know. And so, should we be inquiring? I don't know. I mean, the biblical story of Adam and Eve certainly has it that we shouldn't. Like, the apple of knowledge, and you bite that apple, and like everything goes to hell, right? And so, I would say that we're in kind of a sweet spot, and maybe we should appreciate it. And the sweet spot is this. If we knew for sure, empirically, not because we have faith, but empirically, we could test and prove that there was an afterlife that continued on, that, indefinitely, that we're in a sort of like rocking in our celestial hammock with a daiquiri with our loved ones around us for eternity. Like, don't worry about dying. It's just the start of the real thing, right? Like, if we knew that for sure and could prove it, what would happen is it would strip these 70, 80 years that we get of all meaning. and just be like, oh, that's just the time I spent at the bus stop before I got on the bus, right? Like it would completely deprive this of meaning. On the other hand, and there's a lot, human dignity depends on life having meaning, right? And on the other hand, if we could prove empirically that there was absolutely nothing, there wasn't even a chance of anything, we're biological, and when we die, that's it. That could be so annihilating that we would be like Pip, right? We would be insane. We would be like the guys who were Dostoevsky's friends, right? And so what we have is this sort of sweet spot, this gray area where we don't know, there could be an afterlife, but we don't know for sure. There may be nothing, but we don't know for sure. So it's the perfect blend of there's some reason for hope, but not enough for us to give up our investment in the life we actually live. And to me, that, the fact that we're in that sweet spot says a lot about the human psyche and, if you're a believer, the divine mind.
Josh.
Lots of great points there, Sebastian. There is something to be said about the sweet spot, right? About maybe there's a purpose, and I think probably there is, of being able to lose ourselves behind the veil. And I don't think that the degree that we can continue to pursue that spiritual path is really dependent on our ability to pursue it and our will to pursue it.
Right.
There's a term called spiritual science that is tied into the esoteric traditions. And they would argue that, first of all, the esoteric traditions fully embrace science and the best of it, because it's part of this. It would be stupid not to. They're simply saying that there's more to it than what science can prove, and that the spiritual scientist, by engaging in a extremely disciplined, very difficult practice, can come into experiences that are repeatable and consistent, that can start to speak to these higher realms. The thing that higher is probably not the best word, just different realms. But the thing is, right, and I can only speak to this by what I've personally experienced and by what some of these folks have written before me, is my sense is that the universe has a way of protecting its secrets. And Christ says the gates are wide, the path is narrow. The yogis say that the path to enlightenment is like walking a razor's edge. What they don't say is that it continues to get sharper and it continues to get narrower the closer you get, and more difficult. So there's a price, and a really, you've really got to want it, and desire. And I'll say this: the only desire that is permissible in these paths is a desire to serve as a divine instrument, right? It can't be anything else, or it could go astray, right? So you asked, Pete, should we? I can't say that anyone should or shouldn't. I would only suggest that if we're compelled to, and if we feel that within us, that there are systematic and disciplined pathways that exist, but be careful what you ask for, because it's very difficult.
So you made that point clear.
Sir Arthur, is it Arthur? Sir Arthur Eddington, I think his name was, one of the great physicists. He said, asked about these quantum mysteries. He said something we don't understand. He said clearly something we don't understand is doing we know not what. Right. And so, that was his way of saying, look, we're not going to find the answer. And I'm not sure that those physicists, Einstein, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, they were all sort of unnerved by what they were uncovering, right? I mean, there was an element of fear along with awe and wonder in their discoveries, and an element of trepidation. And it may be that in their own hearts and their own minds, they thought, you know what? let's leave well enough alone. We don't need to understand everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything in closing, fellas? We've done this for about an hour, so I don't want to keep you guys any longer. But Sebastian, thanks for coming on. Everybody should definitely get the book. Let me put the link back up here. Anything you guys want to say before we wrap it up? Here, Josh, you go first.
Hey, I'll pass to Sebastian. Just seriously, great job on your book. And once again, and it's great to have you with us. I think you're bringing up some awesome questions, and it's worth anyone's time to read it.
Thank you. And, I had this idea of sort of like sacred knowledge, which is knowledge that helps other people live more dignified, courageous, less fearful lives. What you're doing, what you survived, and what you're doing in my mind, in my secular mind, is absolutely a sacred endeavor, right? And so good on you. And it's I think all of our obligation to pursue that kind of sacred process. It is our duty to help other people and ourselves live with more dignity. And these kinds of conversations are absolutely crucial to that. And I'm thrilled to be part of it.
Awesome. Stand by. I'll say goodbye to you guys in a sec.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.